He looked like the boy next door. Handsome, intelligent, polite. The kind of man parents trusted. The kind of man women felt safe with. But behind the smile was something far darker. Ted Bundy wasn't hiding in shadows. He wasn't the creepy stranger you crossed the street to avoid. He was the man offering to help you carry your books. The man holding the door open with a smile. The man you thought you could trust. And that was his deadliest weapon. The 1970s were already a decade haunted by fear. Crime was on the rise, cities were changing, and a new kind of killer was emerging. But no one was prepared for Ted Bundy. For 4 years, he moved through the American Northwest like a phantom, vanishing women from campuses, neighborhoods, and crowded streets. He blended in so well that even when sketches of the mystery killer were released, people laughed off the resemblance. "That can't be Ted," they said. "He's too normal, too charming." They couldn't imagine that evil could look so ordinary. But beneath the facade was a predator with urges he could not control. He stalked, he deceived, he hunted, and by the time the truth came out, dozens of women were already gone. This is not just the story of a killer. It is the story of how charm can be a mask, how lies can be deadlier than weapons, and how one man fooled everyone until it was too late. Who was Ted Bundy? How could someone so admired, so trusted, be capable of such horrors? To understand the monster, we must start at the beginning, where secrets and lies were already shaping his world. Every monster has an origin. For Ted Bundy, the story didn't begin with bloodshed. It began with a lie. On November 24th, 1946, in a quiet Vermont town, a baby boy entered the world, a boy who would one day terrify a nation. But from the very first day of his life, Ted Bundy was surrounded by secrets. Bundy's mother, Eleanor Louise, was unwed, a scandal in the 1940s. To protect the family's reputation, Ted was raised to believe his grandparents were his parents and his mother was his sister. Think about that. The person who gave him life was hidden in plain sight. What does that do to a child's mind? To grow up in a world where truth is twisted, where identity is blurred, where lies are the foundation of your home. Inside that home, another shadow loomed. Ted's grandfather, Samuel. Reports described him as violent, controlling, quick to anger. He beat family members, terrorized animals, and ruled the house with fear. Little Ted watched all of this unfold. Did he learn cruelty by example? Or was the seed of darkness already inside him, waiting for the right environment to grow? Neighbors said Ted looked like a normal boy, shy, polite, even well-behaved. But then there were the disturbing signs. A fascination with knives. A cruel curiosity with animals. One story claims that he once placed kitchen knives around his aunt as she slept, arranging them carefully, silently. What kind of child does that? As Bundy grew older, the lies around him began to unravel. In his teenage years, he discovered the truth. His sister was actually his mother. Imagine the betrayal. Imagine realizing that your entire identity, your entire family, was built on deception. For most, it would be a painful revelation. For Bundy, it may have been fuel. The mask of normalcy was already slipping into place. Classmates remembered him as withdrawn, different. He didn't quite fit in, but he learned something powerful. He could lie and get away with it. He could tell stories, spin charm, and people believed him. Ted Bundy was learning the art of deception, and soon, it wouldn't just protect him. It would destroy others. A boy born into lies. A family built on deception. A child fascinated by control, by fear, by the power of appearances. This was not yet the monster, but the mask was forming. Bundy steps into adulthood. He leaves behind the shadows of childhood and enters the bright world of college life. To friends and classmates, he's the picture of ambition and charm. But underneath, the monster is waking. By the mid-1960s, Ted Bundy was no longer the confused child from a broken home. He had transformed into a young man who, on the surface, seemed destined for success. Intelligent, ambitious, and strikingly handsome, Bundy walked the halls of college campuses like he belonged. And to many, he was the ideal student, the ideal boyfriend, even the ideal leader. But beneath the neat clothes and bright smile, something sinister was stirring. At the University of Washington, Bundy studied psychology. Professors admired his sharp mind. Fellow students remembered his confidence. He was charming, even magnetic. People were drawn to him. But what they didn't know was that Bundy was also studying them, observing their behavior, learning what made people trust and what made them vulnerable. It was during this time that Bundy met Stephanie Brooks, a woman who would change the course of his life. Stephanie was beautiful, sophisticated, and from a wealthy California family. For Bundy, she represented everything he wanted: success, acceptance, status. He fell deeply for her, perhaps obsessively. But Stephanie would also become his first taste of rejection. When Stephanie broke off the relationship, Bundy was devastated. To her, he was immature, unfocused, lacking direction. To Bundy, her rejection was proof that he didn't belong in the world he desperately wanted to be part of. And Bundy never forgot it. In fact, some would later argue that many of his victims resembled Stephanie, women with long dark hair, parted in the middle, a haunting echo of the woman who walked away from him. After Stephanie, Bundy's relationships became complicated. He dated Elizabeth Klopfer, a single mother who would remain his girlfriend for years. To Liz, Bundy was kind, attentive, even fatherly to her daughter. But behind the loving boyfriend mask, he was already living a double life. At this point, Bundy was building the two sides of his identity. On one hand, he was the law student, the boyfriend, the campaign volunteer, the rising star. On the other, he was a man who harbored violent fantasies, who prowled the streets at night, who dreamed of control and dominance. The mask was polished. The monster was waiting. Friends and co-workers described Bundy as ambitious, likable, even inspiring. He worked on political campaigns, shook hands with leaders, and looked like someone destined for public office. No one suspected that while Ted was smiling in the daylight, he was already planning his crimes in the dark. By the early 1970s, Ted Bundy was living two lives. One built on charm, ambition, and romance. The other built on secrecy, lies, and violent fantasies he was no longer able to control. And soon, those fantasies would spill into reality. Every mask eventually slips. For Ted Bundy, the mask of the charming boyfriend and ambitious student couldn't contain what lurked inside forever. By the early 1970s, his fantasies of control and violence were no longer enough. He needed more. And soon, women began to vanish. It began in 1974 in Seattle, Washington. Young women started disappearing from their homes, their campuses, their everyday lives. One day they were there, the next they were gone. The first suspected victim was Karen Sparks, a University of Washington student who was attacked in her own home. She survived, but barely. Left unconscious with severe injuries, Karen would have no memory of the assault. But investigators would later mark this as the beginning of Bundy's reign of terror. Then came Linda and Healy. February 1st, 1974. Linda was a University of Washington student, known for her bright smile and active social life. That night, she went to bed in her off-campus house. By morning, she was gone. Her bed was neatly made. A bloody pillowcase was missing. There were no signs of forced entry. She had vanished without a trace. Over the following months, more women would disappear. Donna Gail Manson, Susan Rancourt, Roberta Parks, all young, all attractive, all vanishing under eerily similar circumstances. The pattern was forming, but no one could see it yet. Police departments weren't sharing information across state lines, and the disappearances looked isolated. But they weren't. They were connected by one man. Bundy's method was as simple as it was terrifying. He pretended to be injured. He would wear a sling or hobble on crutches and ask women for help carrying books or loading his car. His charm made him seem harmless. His politeness made him seem safe. And once they let their guard down, he struck. By the summer of 1974, fear was spreading. Women were warned not to walk alone, to be careful around strangers. But the warnings weren't enough, because Bundy didn't look like a stranger. He looked like the boy next door. On July 14th, 1974, Bundy grew bolder. That day, at Lake Sammamish State Park, more than 40,000 people gathered to enjoy the sun. In broad daylight, Bundy approached women, introducing himself simply as Ted. He wore a sling and asked for help loading a sailboat onto his car. Two women never returned home. Janice Ott and Denise Naslund vanished within hours of each other. In a crowded park, with witnesses everywhere, Bundy had pulled off his most audacious crime yet. Witnesses came forward, describing the man as handsome, polite, with an air of confidence. And they all remembered his name, Ted. But in Seattle in 1974, there were thousands of men named Ted. The police had no idea they were closing in on the real one. By the end of 1974, Bundy had abducted and murdered multiple women across Washington and Oregon. But he wasn't finished. The mask of charm was still working. The police had no solid suspect, and Bundy's appetite was only growing stronger. By late 1974, it was no longer possible to dismiss the disappearances as coincidences. The similarities were too strong, the circumstances too strange. A predator was on the loose, one who hunted with precision, patience, and terrifying control. His name was Ted Bundy, but to most he was still just that nice guy with the smile. Bundy's method was chilling in its simplicity. He knew women trusted men who appeared vulnerable. So, he wore a sling, or limped on crutches. He would smile, introduce himself politely, and ask for help. And when they leaned in to assist, they sealed their fate. The victims had striking similarities. Young, attractive, with long, straight hair parted in the middle. To friends and family, they looked unique. To Bundy, they were reflections, echoes of Stephanie Brooks, the woman who had once rejected him. Every abduction was, in a way, revenge. Bundy didn't just kill. He controlled. He stalked campuses, libraries, parking lots. He chose his victims carefully. He planned his moves with terrifying patience. And then, when the urge became unbearable, he struck, fast, calculated, merciless. Investigators began to notice the pattern. Police sketches described a handsome man. Witnesses recalled a polite voice. And most of all, the name, Ted. Over and over again, women vanished after leaving with a man named Ted. But how do you hunt a man who blends in so perfectly? There were thousands of Teds, thousands of men who matched the vague description. Bundy wasn't lurking in alleys. He was walking through campuses, smiling at strangers, working in political offices. He was everywhere and nowhere. In Washington, Oregon, and Utah, fear spread like wildfire. Women cut their hair, changed their routines, traveled in groups. But it didn't matter. Bundy adapted. The mask of charm was unbreakable. To friends, he was thoughtful. To co-workers, he was reliable. To Elizabeth Klopfer, his girlfriend, he was loving, protective, almost perfect. But at night, while Liz slept, Bundy slipped away to hunt. By 1975, investigators knew they were chasing one man. But without technology, without DNA, without interstate databases, all they had were fragments. Witnesses, sketches, descriptions of a tan Volkswagen Beetle. The net was tightening. But Bundy was always one step ahead. The killings were accelerating. The pressure was building. And Bundy's hunger was growing uncontrollable. It wouldn't be long before his double life began to crack. Even the most meticulous predators make mistakes. And for Ted Bundy, those mistakes would finally expose cracks in a mask he had worn so flawlessly. By 1975, Bundy had abducted and murdered multiple women across Washington, Oregon, and Utah. Police were beginning to notice the disturbing pattern, but connecting the dots across state lines was slow, frustrating work. Bundy's first real encounter with law enforcement occurred on August 16, 1975, in Utah. He was pulled over for a stolen vehicle. Inside the car, police discovered burglary tools and personal items belonging to his victims. It was the first time authorities had direct evidence linking him to crimes. Despite the incriminating evidence, Bundy's charm worked in his favor. His polite demeanor, cooperative attitude, and clever manipulations allowed him to post bail and walk free for the moment. To the public, he was still the friendly, ambitious young man they knew. To investigators, he was a cunning, dangerous predator slipping through their fingers. Bundy's ability to manipulate wasn't limited to the courtroom. He had learned the art of deception from a young age. Lying, charming, and exploiting trust. And now, those skills allowed him to continue hunting, even as investigators closed in. But his luck couldn't last forever. Later in 1975, Bundy was arrested again, this time after a traffic stop in Utah. Officers found more evidence: burglary tools, stolen identification, and even a ski mask. The situation was escalating. The predator was cornered. For the first time, the public started seeing the man behind the mask. While in custody, Bundy's intelligence and charisma were on full display. He spoke eloquently, cooperated during questioning, and presented himself as the wronged young man. Many found it hard to reconcile the polite, handsome man before them with the brutal crimes he was accused of. Despite his temporary capture, Bundy was relentless. He used his legal knowledge, intelligence, and charm to manipulate the system. In 1977, he would attempt the unthinkable: escape from custody not once, but twice. Each escape was bold, audacious, and terrifying, proving that the monster lurking behind the charm was as clever as he was ruthless. By now, Bundy's crimes were attracting national attention. The media painted him as both terrifying and fascinating. To the public, he was a riddle. How could a man so charming commit acts so horrific? And Bundy thrived on it. The first true capture of Bundy had revealed only part of the story. The mask had cracked, but the monster was far from finished. His next moves would escalate the horror, challenge law enforcement like never before, and cement his place in history as one of America's most infamous serial killers. By 1978, Ted Bundy had crossed state lines, moving from the Pacific Northwest to Florida. He had already perfected his method of luring women: charm, a fake injury, a polite request for help. But in Florida, his crimes would reach a horrifying new level. On January 15, 1978, Bundy broke into the Chi Omega sorority house. Inside, young women were studying, laughing, unaware that a predator had entered their home. By the time the chaos ended, 2 women were dead, and 1 was gravely injured. The nation was shocked. A sorority, once considered safe, had been violated. The brutality and audacity of the attack made headlines, and fear gripped not just the campus, but the entire state. Bundy's methods remained chillingly consistent. He targeted young, attractive women. He used deception, appearing non-threatening, blending into environments where his victims felt safe. But now, his attacks were escalating in violence and confidence. Following the Chi Omega attack, Bundy struck again in nearby areas. Students, young women, and even teenagers became targets. Each crime showed more planning, more cruelty, more control. He seemed untouchable. Investigators faced immense pressure. The media demanded answers. Families demanded justice. But Bundy's charm continued to shield him. He appeared in court for previous charges, smiling, polite, intelligent, a stark contrast to the horror of his actions. The Florida murders would become Bundy's most infamous. They revealed the depths of his depravity, the precision of his hunting, and the terrifying duality of his life. To the public, he was still a smiling, handsome man. To law enforcement, he was a nightmare who had to be stopped. By the end of 1978, Bundy's crimes had escalated beyond imagination. He had become more reckless, bolder, and more dangerous. But his capture, the event that would finally unmask the monster once and for all, was still ahead. After years of terror, Ted Bundy's luck finally ran out. In August 1975, he was arrested in Utah for a stolen vehicle, and during subsequent searches, police found evidence linking him to multiple disappearances and assaults. The net was tightening, and the predator who had eluded justice was now in custody. Bundy's intelligence and charm didn't vanish behind bars. He learned legal strategies quickly, manipulated guards, and even represented himself in court. The public saw a polite, articulate man, But the true horror of his crimes was slowly coming to light. In 1977, Bundy executed his first escape from custody, a daring break from a Colorado courthouse. He was recaptured, but his audacity stunned the nation. And in 1977 again, he escaped a second time, vanishing for several weeks before being apprehended in Florida. Each escape was bold, calculated, and terrifying. Bundy had become not only a murderer, but a master manipulator of the justice system itself. Once back in Florida, Bundy's crimes escalated. He struck at Florida State University, targeting sorority houses and college campuses. The nation was gripped by fear, and the media painted a complex picture, a charming, intelligent man hiding a monstrous double life. Bundy's trial began in 1979 in Florida. The courtroom became the stage for one of the most sensational cases in American history. Bundy represented himself, dazzling spectators and jurors with his confidence and intellect, all while the horrifying details of his murders were revealed one by one. The duality of Bundy's life was on full display. The charming, educated, articulate man facing the consequences of his heinous acts. Every escape, every manipulation, every lie had led to this moment. The mask was finally being stripped away, revealing the monster beneath. After years of terror, escapes, and manipulation, Ted Bundy finally faced the full force of justice. By the early 1980s, evidence, witness testimonies, and confessions had built an unshakable case. The charming mask he had worn for so long was gone, replaced by the image of a cold-blooded murderer. In 1980, Bundy was sentenced to death for the murders he committed in Florida. The verdict sent shockwaves across the nation. Families of victims finally had closure, and law enforcement had caught the man who had terrorized multiple states. Bundy's life in prison was marked by a mixture of arrogance and inevitability. He continued to manipulate, charm, and attempt to control situations even behind bars. Yet, for the first time, he was confined. The freedom he had exploited for years was gone, and the monster could no longer hunt. Despite the inevitability of his fate, Bundy maintained control of his narrative. He gave interviews, confessed to additional murders, and remained outwardly charismatic. But even his manipulation could not undo the truth. His crimes were real, and justice was finally closing in. On January 24, 1989, Ted Bundy was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. The nation watched as the man who had deceived, charmed, and terrorized countless lives met his final moment. His death marked the end of one of America's most infamous serial killer cases, but the story of his crimes would continue to fascinate, horrify, and educate for generations. Ted Bundy's legacy is a chilling reminder that evil can hide behind charm, intelligence, and normalcy. His life and crimes reveal the danger of deception and the importance of vigilance, both for law enforcement and society at large. From a boy surrounded by lies to a man who terrorized a nation, Ted Bundy's story is one of masks, manipulation, and murder. It is a story that must be remembered, not for fame, but as a cautionary tale of the darkness that can hide behind a smile. From a boy surrounded by lies to a man who terrorized a nation, Ted Bundy's story is one of masks, manipulation, and murder. It is a story that must be remembered, not for fame, but as a cautionary tale of the darkness that can hide behind a smile. If you enjoy this, kindly subscribe, like, and comment for more.